Okay, it's all yours, Eric. Or actually, why don't I make an introduction first? So, as if I'd already done it the first time. Anyway, good afternoon, everybody. This is Jack McCullough. I am the founder of the CFO Leadership Council. Really excited about this program and glad that you can join us. This is running a lean finance operation in a post-COVID world. It is run by our partner, Oxis Consulting. Eric will be leading most of the conversation. Just a little bit of background on what we're doing and why. Most of you know that we had planned on doing CFO Week a couple of weeks ago, and circumstances around COVID-19 forced us to reschedule that to November. But we didn't want to leave our members hanging. It was, obviously the biggest crisis of their careers. So we reached out to Oxis and other partners to come up with a way to get in front of you while you had questions. And Oxis generously is sharing its time and expertise right now. So just a couple of administrative things. There is a chat section, bottom center. If you have questions during the course of the program, or if you want to make some comments, you can enter them in the chat. Fabiana will be monitoring that and will interrupt the presentation from time to time. We highly encourage you to do that. Also, we will be asking 4 polling questions during the course of this program. And if you need CPE, you will need to answer all 4 of the questions as well as beyond at the beginning and at the end. So also, we just want to get your answers to the questions too, because they're quite insightful. So with that covered, Eric, I'm going to go on mute and the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jack. And welcome everybody to today's Master Academy session. This is definitely an interesting event, something, we've never done something quite like this before. So this is my 3rd one today. So it's quite interesting to see how this plays out. So my name is Eric Libros. I'm Vice President of Business Transformation for Oxis. Oxis is an organization that provides management consulting and outsourcing services. My role specifically is as Vice President of Business Transformation is to lead all of the areas of the business that drive productivity, efficiency, cost improvements to our clients' organizations. We do that through a variety of means. We do a lot of process optimization work, organizational redesign and restructuring, a lot of process automation, digital transformation related work. And we have a nearshore center in Costa Rica where we provide business process outsourcing services as well as IT outsourcing services. All of those parts of the business report up to me, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today. Dan?
Hi, and I'm Dan Day. I lead the Management Consulting and BPO Center down in Costa Rica with specific focus on finance and accounting and customer service outsourcing.
So today's session is really is focusing on running a lean finance operation in the post-COVID world, and it's really trying to answer a number of different questions. The ones we're going to focus on for a lot of this is how do you streamline your operations and get more efficient? How do you establish real-time reporting so you can get better visibility into your operation and make better decisions? And then how do you become more agile and flexible within the organization itself? A little bit about the format of the session. So we have a presentation that we're going to go through, which it's supposed to be around 20 minutes, but we were running long. So I'm going to try to go through stuff a little more quickly and, and try to get through it without to leave, because what we want to do is leave time at the back end for your questions. But with that, we have one of our associates, Fabiana Corredor, available. She's going to be receiving the questions, and then the questions themselves will be posed back by her so that we can respond to. Fabi, say hello.
I was on mute. Hi, everyone. Sorry.
So Fabi will answer those questions, and these are small groups. So we'll be happy to stop what we're doing in terms of our presentation. I'd rather make this more interactive and collaborative. So we'd be happy to stop what we're doing and speak to the questions as they come up. Fabi will kind of govern that. But if you have a question that's specifically related to something that we're presenting on, please don't hesitate to jump in and ask that question. We'll be happy to address it in real time. And with that, I'll kind of get started. So we have all been living through this situation with COVID-19. It's been about 3 months now that we've been operating under these kind of guidelines. And I don't think any of us have ever experienced anything quite like this in our lifetimes. It's been an extreme disruption to the way we, not just the way we conduct business, the way we conduct our lives. So many things have changed. And there's been a tremendous impact to business operations. You're seeing, revenue streams changing dramatically. You're seeing how you work changing dramatically. You're seeing whether you're working changing dramatically and where you're doing it. So this is all something that's been happening in real time over the past 3 months, but it's really not the first part of the equation of business disruption. Business disruption has been going on for quite a while now. You're seeing a lot of different things that have driven businesses, forcing businesses to change. A lot of it's related to technology and the way technology is being used by certain organizations to attract customers, to interact with customers, to sell to customers, and to perform the work that you're doing. So COVID-19 is the latest in a long line of business disruptive steps, and probably the biggest one in all of our lifetimes, but it's not something that's brand new. So I thought it would be helpful to kind of say, what are some of the things we've learned from this situation with COVID-19, being that we've just kind of hopefully are on the coming out of its part of the equation, we hope. What can we take away and learn from this? So it starts with that organizations need to run lean, clean, and portable. That is pretty much the first lesson that we learned. When this hit and businesses were forced to shut down, work remotely, establish work from home, you needed to adjust your workforce and send them out. Now, you had to hope that you had the infrastructure to support it, and you had to hope that you had the operations to support it. And what we found is that organizations that had already established some form of solid infrastructure around portable devices and had the people with the ability to work from home, even on a limited basis, were able to make this adjustment much more quickly. Organizations that have started to leverage automation and process standardization have been able to reduce the dependency on people and on locations so that they could become more nimble in how they adjusted to this world. But the same rule applies to organizations on the opposite side who had not made these changes. They struggled with this type of transition. You have to look at the way you operate, reduce the amount of manual processes, reduce the amount of exceptions that you're handling, reduce your dependency on specific individuals and on where those individuals are sitting in order to make this process work. Another thing that's really become critical as a result of the situation is the ability to manage cash. Now, this is nothing new to a business. Every business is always focused on cash and bringing cash in the door. But what we've seen, there's a survey put out by PwC that we're quoting here that says 71% of CFOs say their top concern is cash and liquidity. Why? Because you're not quite sure how you're going to collect, when you're going to collect, and how much you're going to collect from the customers. They may not be in business anymore. They may not be transacting anymore. They may be out of work. All different kinds of things impacting them. So having strong visibility on your cash position has become absolutely critical. Having the ability to make sure that bills are getting out on time, that they're accurate, that they're complete, is become critical, and the focus on cash has become critical as well. It's absolutely important to have better visibility to that, to your cash position more than ever before. So in terms of business continuity, a lot of organizations have established business continuity plans. Most of us work in places that have it. But I don't think any business continuity plan that any of us envisioned anticipated a global pandemic where everyone had to go somewhere, where everyone had to leave their office and their operation. There wasn't a place that wasn't being affected by this. So organizations that had the proper infrastructure in place were the ones that made the adjustments better. But there's so many pieces to that puzzle. So infrastructure isn't just about having a laptop and being able to go work from home, and it's not even about having strong collaboration and knowledge management tools. What about the connectivity that's required in people's homes, where you have you have somebody working in an office and they have to do video and it works fine once you're in an office, but then you go home and all of a sudden, you have 3 people at home watching Netflix and you're trying to do a video chat. Well, it doesn't work that well in those circumstances. So those things were not anticipated and really have become a part of the new normal that we're working with. So in today's world, having this type of plan in place and the ability to adapt to it quickly has become absolutely critical. And then lastly, what we've seen is that organizations are looking even more at automation than they ever have before. So as we've talked about, you have to make yourself lean, clean, and portable. Automation enables all of that to happen. And companies are looking at the technologies that are out there and saying, what can I bring in and how fast can I bring it in? As opposed to, prior to that, when it was kind of a burgeoning market, but still levels of adoption were lagging. And we'll talk more about that. So in the survey that, I was citing before from PwC, about 80% of CFOs pretty much were saying they were shutting down initiatives and canceling or deferring investments. But only of those investments, only 20% of companies said they were planning to cut digital transformation investments. It's telling you where the money is going to be spent and where the realization is that you need to spend it. Even before the pandemic, this was a thing. CFOs had begun recognizing that their operating models were outdated and had needed to change. We like to talk about it here at Auxis in terms of the world of traditional finance to what we like to call modern finance. So many of you still live in the world of traditional finance. Traditional finance basically is, you're kind of the reporter on the business. You're telling people what happened last month. You're spending heavy amounts of time on just keeping the lights on the transactional work that needs to get done. It's not uncommon to see 70, 80, sometimes even 90% of your resources focusing on doing transactional work. A lot of that is happening because of the amount of manual processes that still exist within organizations. And so what companies are doing is they're struggling to kind of move off of that. And that has been going on well before the pandemic started. But what's happened is once the pandemic hit, it's really kind of accelerated the process. Now, the end state is what we like to call modern finance. So modern finance is where the finance organization does that type of work, but does it in the most cost-effective and least amount of resource-dependent model possible, and really changes their role from scorekeeper to business advisor. You're working closely with the business, you're understanding the data that's flowing through the organization, and you're providing advice and guidance to the business, not just reporting on what happened. That's the big change that organizations are looking for when they talk about moving into this kind of digital transformation, modern finance type of world. And that brings us to our first polling question. So I'd like you to rate your organization's digital readiness in effectively running your finance operations remotely in a post-COVID world. Jack, it's on you.
All right, hopefully that's visible to everybody.
It is.
Okay, couple of things while we're waiting for everybody to answer. First of all, just as a reminder, if you need CPE, you will have to complete this and all the polling questions, but more importantly, we just want to get your answers to this because they're usually very interesting. And also, some people have trouble sometimes just clicking on an answer and making it stick. What we've learned is with certain operating systems, if you escape from maximize window temporarily, that for some reason that changes that and gives you the ability to answer this. And then after you've done so, you can go back. And finally, if you have any questions, you can enter them in the chat box and Fabiana will answer them. And actually, I didn't know you go by Fabi. I've always been calling you, you probably thought I was a really formal guy. So.
No, I like both.
Okay.
I use Fabiana when I'm mad at her.
Oh, do you? Yeah. I'm Jackie when my friends and family are mad at me. Anyway, let's end the polling and see how people did. And hopefully that's visible, Eric.
It is not. Now it is. Okay.
All right. You have to actually.
Let's see how we did. So, so this is actually a little more like closer to what I expected. We've been getting a lot of, hey, most organizations have been saying, we did pretty well. There were almost none that said they were poor in terms of adapting to this this change. And I actually subscribe that to memory loss and lack of remembering what happened 3 months ago, because I know a lot of organizations struggled with this. Yeah, now we're in a good place, but it took sometimes a lot of bumps to get you there. So what you're seeing is about 58% of organizations are saying, we did okay, but there were still some challenges. 33% are saying we were fully ready. I still think there's some optimism, over optimism there. And then poor 8%, first time anybody's actually admitted to us that they've actually struggled. So when I talk about the modern finance organization, what am I really referring to? So let's talk about what those key principles are of that organization. Well, job one, and it starts with this first and foremost, is you need to get out of being a transaction processing shop. That's what most finance organizations are known for today. I'm sorry to say that, but that's the truth. If you're spending 70, 80, or 90% of your time doing transactions, you're a transaction processing shop. You need to shift that equation and reduce it at least down to, say, 60%, 50% would be great. This work is never going to go away. You're always going to have to do it. The question is, how do you do it? So you need to look for ways to free up people from doing this type of work while make sure the quality of the work is being done and the timeliness of the work is being done, and at the same time trying to do it at a reduced cost. Depending on people to do work is the most expensive way to do anything. So once you start making investments in some of the solutions we'll talk about in a minute, you'll start to see how, while those investments may sound like they're high cost, at the end of the day, it changes the whole dynamic of the organization, frees people up to focus on other things, and really ultimately will drive cost reductions. The second piece is becoming an analytics powerhouse. So what do we mean by that? Well, we talked about it before, that business operations is really dependent. The business is depending upon you to really provide insights into what's going on. In order to do that, you need to have real-time visibility into the organization. We'll talk more about that, but at the end of the day, real-time analytics gives you the ability to know what's happening now and how to act upon it. That is what the business is looking for. It needs the organization to provide guidance and advice to move forward, not to report on what happened last month. And the ability to provide those predictive insights isn't just left at saying, hey, this is what might happen. This is not just predicting the future and guessing at it. It's saying, this is what happened based on this, what's going to happen based on this data. But more importantly, what am I going to do about it? Very closely tied to that is developing a commercial mindset. So you have to take that data, that information that you have insight, that you're providing insight to, and tie it back to the goals of the business, how the business is operating, and really understand the key drivers of a business, what the market conditions are, and what to make happen. Very few people, when COVID-19 hit, anticipated a complete shutdown of their revenue stream. So nobody could anticipate that. The question isn't how did you anticipate it, is what do you do about it when it happened, and how do you act accordingly? So even now, so we're seeing organizations starting to see revenue pick up, and things are being driven back. And is this the return that everybody's hoping for? Or is it a temporary blip that's being driven by things like a PPP spending that the government has done? And there's a lot of questions being asked by people. Having the ability to provide answers to those questions is really what the role of finance is becoming. And then lastly, in order to get you through all of this, you really need to start looking outside the organization and build a collaborative ecosystem, working with partners. You have the ability to understand and drive the core strategic aspects of your business, but you're not necessarily experts at automation, or experts at business analytics, or experts at even processing the types of transactions you're doing. So building a structure that allows you to leverage partners and be able to focus on the core while allowing you to flex up and down as needed has become part of the modern finance organization. And we'll talk more about how that applies. So how do you get from being a transaction shop to what we're talking about, that modern finance organization? What are the key strategies? Well, for larger organizations, it starts with captive shared services. That when you centralize operations and bring a number of diverse operating centers together under one roof, that helps you to get more efficient. It helps you to get more structured. It helps you even to improve some of the operations and reduce costs. It doesn't necessarily get you out of being a transaction processing shop, because you're still processing those transactions. You're just doing it hopefully with less people and in a more standardized manner. So that'll get you there. But this is typically open to just larger organizations. Smaller organizations don't usually have the scale to try to achieve this, and need to look at other ways to make this happen. But even the larger organizations, captive shared services is just one piece of the puzzle. The second piece is automation. So this is what we've been talking about, and how to leverage automation to improve productivity, efficiency, and reducing the amount of transactional work that you're doing. But it requires you to make changes. One change is what we've been talking about, standardizing processes, reducing processing exceptions and variations, and changing the focus of the organization to one of productivity. These changes are absolutely necessary for automation for you to get the benefit of automation. Now, what that doesn't do is it still doesn't solve your focus issue. If you have people who are still focused on the transactions, they're not looking at the other things they need to do to make things work in the organization. You need to realign the roles in your organization, shifting people from transactional focus to more analytical focus, to more revenue driving focus, to more customer interaction focus, to more internal customer interaction focus, change the organization's culture, change the organization's approach, and change the roles in the organization itself. Now, you're going to have to look at that organization and say, are these people that I need to move over, are they the ones with the right skills to make this transition? Sometimes you're going to say yes, and you're going to take some very good people who are doing some jobs that are probably beneath their skill set and giving them a much better job to do. But other times you're going to push people into a place that's not part of their comfort zone, and they may not be willing or ready or able to make that change. In those cases, you're going to have to make tough decisions, but you're going to have to require you to upskill your talent in your organization. And then lastly, you're going to have to make investments. We understand that the investments need to be made in these type of technologies, but what people need to also understand is that unless you make these changes that we're talking about, the process changes, the organizational changes, that payback will be very uncertain. You may not get the benefits you're looking for unless you're prepared to make the holistic changes throughout the organization that this automation will drive. And then the third way that organizations are moving to get away from being a transaction processing shop is they're leveraging outsourcing. So what organizations are doing is they're taking the outsourcer who are the experts at doing basic transactional work and pushing that work to them, taking advantage of their best practices, and frankly, taking advantage of their ability to execute on automation initiatives much more quickly and effectively and lower cost benefits, because this is what they do on a day-to-day basis. So what's happening is you're going to get a labor savings traditionally from outsourcing. In our model, it typically ranges anywhere from 25 to 50%. And these savings can be reinvested in innovation and allow your automation initiatives to be self-funded. So you not only get the savings to invest, then you get further savings from productivity gains. So what we're seeing is a hybrid model is becoming the new normal. Organizations are really trying to keep to the core, the more strategic, more critical work, the more customer-facing work to themselves, while pushing the non-strategic transactional work to a third party. That forces you to get out of being a transaction processing shop, as long as you change the thinking and the focus of the organization and really get the benefits we're looking for.
Eric, I actually have a question about outsourcing.
Yep.
So it says, Eric, regarding outsourcing, what do you think is a typical minimum size required to outsource? I come from a large enterprise organization with hundreds of people being outsourced to India, but in my new company, we have a much smaller scale. I see the value of moving transactional work out, but I'm not sure if it would work for us. What are your thoughts?
Well, this is going to depend on who you're trying to outsource with and where you're trying to outsource it. So the larger outsourcing firms, I don't have to name names, we all know who they are. Those firms are not interested in smaller footprints. They're interested in the large scale, and they're frankly interested in moving it to where they have made their main investments, which are typically in the Asia offshore model. So you need to, if you're going to look at outsourcing, you need to open up the view of what you're looking at, and start to incorporate, maybe, smaller organizations, ones that are more focused on working middle market type businesses. Typically, the scale there tends to be, smaller. You can take a footprint of maybe, instead of 100 FTEs, maybe you're talking about, 10 FTEs. That's, something that you'll find an organization willing to take, but it has to be the right organization. To make that work also, I would encourage you to kind of steer away from the offshore model, because it brings inherent challenges to trying to run your business if you're a mid-market company. You're not used to working in this type of remote workforce. You are now, but you're not used to working with a third party handling a lot of your transactions. And if you're dealing with time zone issues and geographic travel issues and things like that, it just makes it that much more complicated to try to make it work. In a nearshore model like we offer, we work in your time zones. It's easy to work together. It's a very collaborative model. So a smaller footprint with a collaborative operating model is what you should be looking for. And it can work, but I would encourage you to focus on, a broader look at the organization to say, how many pieces of this can I apply? The more scale you can provide to an outsourcer, the better benefit they're going to give you back in terms of savings, but also in terms of productivity gains. So, it's a balancing act. I would say, you have to really have those discussions and see who fits into the profile. But, going down to that next level is probably where you need to go.
Thank you.
Did we ask this? I forgot. Did we ask this polling question already or not?
No.
I don't think we did.
Okay. So this brings us to the second polling question. Sorry, guys, this is my third session today, so it gets a little confusing. So our second polling question is, what's the biggest priority right now you have when it comes to running your finance operations? Thank you, Jack.
Sorry, I launched it prematurely. Your answer was actually really great, though, and I didn't want to interrupt it. So it looks like about 2/3 have voted. We'll give it about 10 more seconds if you still want to get your opinion in, and then I will end the polling. Okay, good. 14 out of 17. Not bad at all. Can you see those results?
Yes.
Beautiful.
So biggest priority when it comes to running finance operations, the number one by far is achieving efficiencies through automation. So, clearly the message is getting through. Companies are realizing this needs to be done. I'm curious if this question, how this question would have been responded to pre-COVID and post-COVID. But I think the point we're making is this is not new. This is something that's been coming. It's just being accelerated by this process. Now, similar to that is reducing costs, because I think once you're getting more efficient, you're going to be able to lower your costs. And then lastly, better visibility through analytics. I think that's all inherently comes together when it's part of this model. So interesting answers. Nobody's that concerned about quality. That's an interesting one. That's something else that a little surprising.
And actually in the previous session, quality was the biggest issue. So
right.
very, very different from this session.
So let's talk about a couple of the challenges. Let's talk about a couple of the challenges to try to achieve this modern finance organization. Number one is just the digitalization of the organization itself. So as you can see here, there's a lot of different technologies listed, okay? So a lot of organizations are making investments in some of the newer ERP solutions, and they've done a great job of incorporating a lot of the automation, a lot of the process efficiencies that you're looking for, big if, you implement the system correctly and adjust to the system's capabilities. But even then, there are still holes in the game that require manual work, that require you to do data inputs, to move data around, and you still often have data that's disconnected throughout the organization. So you normally, even with a newer ERP, you're still going to be looking at these type of technologies as pieces of the puzzle. And so what we're talking about here, there's different categories of it. So on the left-hand side, we're talking about robotics process automation, RPA technology that allows you to automate manual work. In the next column, you're talking about things like automated reconciliations and financial closing management that allows you to get more visibility and control over the close and allows you to automate some of the reconciliations performing. Another group of solutions is AP automation. You have analytic solutions that provide more visibility. You have workflow. We're showing a lot of different elements here. The reason I'm doing this is because, frankly, it's confusing. What are the right answers? What do you need to pick from this menu to say which are the ones that fit into my organization? There's no one right answer, but I will tell you that no matter what your technology footprint looks like, pieces of this will likely apply. and you're going to need to incorporate more than just what your ERP has. So at the end of the day, this is one piece of the puzzle that you need to work with, and it can be confusing because there's so many different choices to be had. We'll talk about how to help get you there in a little bit. Second big challenge is around data. This has always been a challenge with organizations. Data is often, is found to be disconnected. It's often unstructured. You don't have great access to it. It's sometimes being controlled by different groups of people that don't like to share. Like what I like to call the troll under the bridge. And, if you don't know the magic words, you don't get the answers. But at the end of the day, with uncertain, rapidly changing revenue streams and resources scattered all over the place, you need to have real-time visibility into your organization. It's a must-have, not a nice-to-have. So how do you get there? What do you do? The thing is, the finance organization really is the department that really can provide the most value here. A lot of the data that you're seeing here is controlled by different departments, but ultimately flows through finance, who's providing the input on how it impacts your bottom line and what your P&L looks like, and how the organization is going to be looking going forward. So what finance needs to be able to do is to get a hold of this information, and as we've been talking about, changing their focus from transactional to using this information to provide more insights. Finance is really the one group that has access to all of it, has visibility to all of it, and has the tools and capabilities to effectively analyze it and provide insights on strategy, on current activities, on predictive events, and then guidance on what to do about it. So the challenge is getting a hold of that data and then bringing that data into a cohesive format that you can use to drive insights. That's a big challenge that organizations are facing. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples. I'm going to run through them quickly because, again, for the sake of time, but these are a couple of examples we've done for some of our clients that really provided tremendous insights into current state information on, in this case, it happens to be accounts payable. So we had a client that was struggling with a challenged system implementation, and they were very dependent upon suppliers to provide products that they needed for manufacturing and delivery of other products that they were making. And vendors were not getting paid on time, and they had no great visibility to it, and things were kind of getting lost in the shuffle. So we were able to take a report like this and literally stand it up in 2 weeks. What is it that you're seeing here? You're basically seeing a summary view of the accounts payable operation, showing the different buckets of where invoices are sitting, the amount of those invoices, and the quantity of those invoices, and literally all the different suppliers at the bottom that you could see where these are, where things are sitting, and what to do about it. So this is literally something that was available on the phone that said if a supplier was calling and saying, hey, I need to find out about my payment, you could literally click on this and click your way through to get to a specific invoice. We were able to stand this up in 2 weeks because we were able to grab the data from the ERP system, drop it into a SQL database, and layer a Power BI dashboard on top of it to provide visibility. It's very powerful and very quick, but provided tremendous value. But we took it a step further. We developed beyond that kind of summary view, a very specific view of exceptions, invoices with exceptions. So we could now find out not just where an invoice is sitting, but in what category is the exception that's keeping it from being processed, and what we can do about it. Because we had a lot of invoices, we just didn't know where they were or why it was being processed and being delayed from being processed. So this allowed us to focus on specific categories of exceptions and really focus on where the backlogs were sitting. And again, all this was stood up in literally a period of about 2 weeks. So not major initiatives to get done, but very valuable and very tremendously insightful. So we're talking about this type of transformation and making it happen. But one of the challenges that a lot of organizations have is making it work. So we know that a lot of organizations, there are many surveys that talk about how many organizations are making these type of changes, finance transformation initiatives. But unfortunately, there's also a lot of surveys that talk about how many of them fail. There's Gartner and many other organizations that provide very similar studies about finance transformation initiatives and really take this more broadly into a lot of IT technology related initiatives. failing? What's the reason for that? Why is it just so hard? So number one is setting realistic expectations. A lot of organizations do not go into this with the right set of expectations. They push to get things done fast without understanding the implications of things getting done quickly, without doing it for the full process. And you need to understand what the trade-offs are for speed versus, fully completing a process. There's opportunities for both. It's not wrong to push to get things done faster. It's wrong to do it with the wrong set of expectations. Talent has become a big issue. Even before this situation with COVID, we were experiencing talent issues across the board, and no more so than in the finance organization. There was a big competitive labor market. That's somewhat changed at this point, but I have a feeling it's not going to be long before it comes back to that same situation. So getting the right talent is become a challenge for organizations, but more importantly, getting the right talent to do the jobs you need for this future model is the real challenge organizations are facing. And a lot of your current organization may not have the right skill set. So you have to kind of understand and balance all of that and say, do I bring in the right people? How do I get them? And what do I do with the people who I have in my organization today? Adoption is a big issue. It's a change management thing. It's the ability to accept the change and get across the cultural barriers that are preventing change from happening. So, we see this as a very common event. So I have a statistic here that only 3% of organizations have started their RPA journey have been able to scale their digital workforce. So you would think with all the hype that you're hearing out there on RPA and how many people are jumping on that bandwagon, that there would be a huge output of robots that are out there that are driving process automation. Well, 3% of organizations have been able to scale. It's telling you people are interested in it, but they're not necessarily implementing it and getting the results they're looking for. Part of that is adoption. Part of that is the effectiveness of the implementation. All of this needs to be looked at and done properly. And then lastly, it's about the expected ROI, which comes back to often realistic expectations. You have to have the right set of expectations and understand what I'm going to get, what changes do I need to make to get it, and lastly, is it always just about cost, or are there other benefits I'm looking for? Which brings us to our next polling question. What's the primary challenge that's impacting your ability to achieve your digital transformation outcomes? Jack, your turn.
All right, that should be visible to everybody.
It is.
So beautiful, no one's answered yet. And Eric, I just want to make you aware that it's 3:07.
Yep.
So, we'll probably end between 3:20 and 3:25.
Okay.
Eric, and in the meantime, I have a couple of questions.
Okay.
So one says, when it comes to RPA, robotic process automation, what I've heard about its advantages is that you can implement it relatively fast compared to other traditional IT implementations. Do you think this is an understatement? What do you typically see as the timelines and payback for implementing RPA?
Great question. It's definitely not an understatement, but it could be. How's that for an answer? It depends on what you're trying to implement and the process and the complexity of the process you're trying to implement. So what we do typically is we look at processes and categorize them in various groupings. So there are simple processes that literally can be stood up in 2 to 3 weeks, and you'll get the benefits from it. There are medium level complexity processes that might take, I would say, 2 months, maybe 3 months to implement. And then there are high complexity processes that could take you 6 months or more. So you need to understand what the process is, what's involved in implementing it. A lot of it's going to be about how the process is executed, all those standardizations and variations that we're talking about. Think about the way a bot works. A bot will follow a transaction through its various steps. So if you have a relatively straight flow of a transaction and you don't have a lot of variations or exceptions, it can get to the end state pretty quickly, and you don't have to write code for each of the different exceptions you're dealing with. But if you have 20 exceptions on a process, now you have to get to a point where the bot has to make a decision. The decision is go down this path, or this path. Well, each of those paths need to be developed and coded. That translates into time and cost for implementation.
Thank you.
Okay, so there are the results. Any
Okay,
surprises?
so the primary challenge that organizations are facing when it comes to digital transformation, number one is selecting the right tools and technology. So clearly something similar to what we were talking about, the complexity and the confusion, I think, that's kind of out there around these things. Close behind that is finding the right resources to execute the program. So that's an interesting one too. And I think we need to talk about, you know, what that means and where you get them. And we'll do that in a second. Lastly is funding the innovation. I think that's something we've been talking about. And finally, resistance to change. I think these are very good representation of what we're seeing out there. You know, all of the above applies. The question is, which one can you, is really limiting you, and what can you do about it? So let's talk about some of that. What's the right service delivery model for your organization? Let's talk about that. So most organizations gravitate towards this, the in-house model. And the in-house model means you're going to try to do everything yourself. And, you know, theoretically, when you look at that in-house model, you're thinking, oh, that's going to cost me the lowest to implement. And it might have higher risk because I'm kind of doing it myself, but, you know, we should be able to get it done. Well, I would argue that, you notice the word lowest is in quotes. If you're not doing it effectively, and if you're taking longer to implement than, you know, providing for the right set of resources to help guide you, it may not be the lowest cost. It may cost you more than you would expect, and certainly more than it might cost if you did it with a partner. It has the highest risk because you're doing it yourself. You're not experts at this. You have resources that this is what they do for a living, and then you're trying to do it yourself. And these are specialized skill sets, hard to acquire. So you're hoping that your organization can pick it up. It's a challenge for many organizations. Ultimately results in slower levels of adoption, because what's happening is adoption is being driven by success. Quick wins, I see something, hey, I like it, I want it. Well, these organizations that kind of try to do things themselves often struggle with adoption because it's a long road to get to the final state. So what happens if you try to hire digital transformation consultants? It's definitely going to help you get there faster. It's definitely going to reduce the risk because you are hiring the experts. It is perceived to be the highest cost, but the highest cost may not actually be the highest cost if it's taking you twice as long to do it yourself, and if you've had a failure mixed in along the way. Does it accelerate adoption? I would argue that success, as I said, accelerates adoption. So perhaps it does, but a lot of that also depends on the organization itself. The third model, and what we're seeing a lot of organizations go to, is what we just talked about previously, was this kind of hybrid model that incorporates a third party, you know, a BPO type organization. So what you're doing here is you're working with a partner, you're moving, it's aligned with moving some of the transactional work. So you take some of that transactional work, you move it to the partner. We already talked about the benefits of that in terms of moving that out of your plate so that you can refocus. But now what you're doing is you're also getting the partner who's an expert at this type of implementation to have that be part of the equation. The right partner for you is one that doesn't just take butts and seats and move them, but takes those people, moves them, changes the process, brings in the automation, and not only gives you labor savings through labor arbitrage, but through productivity gains through these type of technologies. It truly will allow you to refocus your organization. Now, I don't want to make it sound like, hey, it's, you know, it's a walk in the park. You know, there is risk with this model. Clearly there is, but I would argue that the risk is more cultural than it is operational. I would argue that it's more about getting used to working with a partner than it is about whether the partner is going to be successful or not. The success of a partner typically is very dependent upon the collaboration that they establish with their client. And if you don't have a good collaborative model, yeah, you're going to have more risk. So cultural adoption is very important to the success of this. Brings us to our fourth polling question. Are you planning to increase your use of outsourcing as a tool to reduce costs, improve flexibility in your finance back office operations?
And hopefully that's visible and
It is.
people are answering. 13 of 17. That's about what we've been getting. So I'm going to close it in about 10 seconds. Too bad we can't get unanimous. Oh well. 15. All righty. Hopefully you can see
Great.
those results.
So this is interesting. This is this we've seen in all of the sessions I've had an increase from the traditional answers on whether people are looking to outsource. You know, typically we're seeing a lot of organizations saying they're considering it. Other organizations saying, you know, they're actively, and some are already saying actively are doing it. What we're seeing here is a much larger footprint in the ones who are actively looking to outsource or are considering it than we've typically seen. And frankly, this is what we're seeing as a byproduct of this COVID situation. We're getting a lot more companies coming to us and saying, hey, does this make sense for us? Let's have a conversation. Let's look at it. Because I think at the end of the day, it has to be part of the operating model for you to consider, given that you're already working with likely a remote workforce. Why not take advantage of, you know, some of the other benefits you get from this? It may not be the right answer, but at least it's worth having that conversation. So this is you know, this is in line with a lot of what we're hearing, but it's actually the strongest response we've seen to date. So in summary, I hope that you get from this session what we say at the top here. Doing nothing that's not an option. Basically, if you're going to do nothing, I would argue that what we say in this cartoon, a slow decline in obsolescence, is probably understated. What we're seeing as a result of COVID is a very fast decline into obsolescence. How many organizations have literally gone from, you know, a running business to shutting their doors and may not reopen? You're seeing that over and over and over again. So this is the time, and these are the situations that are driving it. You need to look at technology and understand that the resistance is more likely going to be cultural than it is operational. Many organizations, the resistance the things I hear about are losing control or it's too expensive. Well, you know, at the end of the day, COVID has forced us to reconsider the way we look at this and the way we analyze these types of investment decisions. Losing control, you're losing control already when you have people all over the place and customers, you have no idea what they're doing, okay? And if they're coming back. And too expensive, well, too expensive is only a part of the equation. Yes, it's got to be about cost savings, but it's also about these other elements. Do I have a business that's resilient, that can respond and adjust to changing times? Can I shift resources quickly to focus on driving revenue and lower my costs in areas I don't need to do that? That is where the business needs to start focusing and reconsidering. So to me, doing nothing is not an option. Really taking the time to understand what your options are and then making those decisions based off of that, I think is what people need to be doing. And hopefully that's what you're getting from this discussion.
Eric,
I will turn it over to Kavi for questions.
Yeah, actually, I have a pretty good question that I missed. So how do you automate when your business processes have more exceptions than rules?
Yeah, I saw that one pop up in the chat. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that we do is we don't start out of the box and try and automate the full process end to end, right? We try and, you know, analyze, hey, what are the most common exceptions? What are the elements of the process that, you know, are acceptable, you know, or the easiest to implement and to automate? So, you know, I think, you know, you see a lot of organizations that are like that, right? They've got manual processes that are broken with lots of exception paths. So the key is focus on the processes that are cleanest, and within that, focus on the parts of the process that do have specific business rules or things like that that cover, you know, typically there's some sort of Pareto, right? 80% of, you know, the exceptions are caused by, you know, 20% of the volume, or 80% of the volume is caused by 20% of the exceptions. So try and find, you know, the 3 or 4 common exception types that drive, you know, the bulk of the work, and try and automate those first. So it's about understanding the process and really prioritizing at some points within a specific process.
I would also add that exceptions, frankly, are a choice. You're making a choice to have exceptions. You have to look at what's behind the exception and say, do I really need to be doing this? There's a lot of organizations that I work with that treat every customer differently, that manage, you know, and they have these high touch models, which are great. But if you're not charging for that, if you're not setting the structure to support that, you're overburdening your organization with the work that needs to be done. You have to look at these exceptions and really understand the drivers there, and maybe you can start reducing them and standardizing more so and not doing everything for everybody. I think the world we're in today, that's a luxury that many companies have to take a hard look at and say, is this something that I can change?
Yeah, one of the things that we'll see is, folks will, issue an exception because they have very, very minuscule tolerances for variations. And it ends up putting the exception into like an inquiry process or dispute resolution process. And, in the course of chasing a couple of bucks, right, you end up adding, several days or several weeks to your collection process, right? Because you chose to manage at a zero tolerance basis, which puts you into, dispute resolution, those sorts of things. So you got to look at your end-to-end process, understand what the exceptions are, figure out which are the ones that, I need and which are the ones that I've got some flexibility on, and potentially redesign the process to work that out, or, automate, the parts that are kind of the biggest drain.
Yeah, I have a great example of that. A customer that we worked with that had, they had a large number of claims and deductions that they were dealing with. And they had a very low threshold for where they would just approve that payment. So it was anything under $50, they would approve. Everything over $50, they would fight. So guess what? When I looked at the data and I analyzed it, they weren't really fighting. Basically, what they were doing was they were fighting the larger ones, and the ones that were typically between $100 and $500, and there were literally thousands of them, were sitting in a bucket, just waiting to get processed, waiting to get resolved. Nobody was looking at those transactions, and essentially the customer was holding up a payment because you're not getting paid because you're not resolving the exception. So in this case, if you just had said, all right, let's what we actually did there is we automated the process to kind of weed out a certain number of those exceptions and be able to reject them, and in other cases just approved it. You may not have gotten all your money back that you were hoping for, but you were able to get paid a lot quicker. Trade-offs.
Gentlemen, I think we are at about the end of the time, unless Fabiana has a final question.
No, I'm going to stop here. And what I would say is if we didn't answer all of the questions, reach out directly and we will address them personally after this. So we would love to hear from you, and, we can chat with more time with Eric and Dan.
Yeah, absolutely. So Eric, do you have any concluding remarks, or should we?
No, I think we're good. I appreciate everybody coming on. And as Fabiana mentioned, don't hesitate if you didn't get your question answered. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us directly. We'll be happy to address it personally.
Yeah, I just want to thank you guys. For those who don't know, they're doing this session basically all afternoon. We wanted to keep it small and intimate so people could ask questions. And I know all of you are really, really busy right now, so I appreciate your support of the members and other CFOs to help them get through this crisis. So, and with that, I am going to click the end button, but everyone have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Bye.